unworkable situation.
Good evening, everyone. Could I ask those in the chamber to join me for acknowledgement of country and a prayer, please? I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight and also pay respects to elders past and present. And Almighty God, we humbly beseech thee of our safe thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the city of Clarence. Amen. Thank you. I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and what is said at this meeting is not protected by privilege. There is a link to the agenda papers on Council's website. Declare the meeting open and note Alderman Chong is on leave and that we have Alderman Walker and Von Berto joining us via Zoom. Are there any declarations of interest of Alderman or close associate, please? There being none. Move to item 4, which is Omnibus Items. There are a number of items there we'll deal with as we move through and adopt them with one motion at the end. So 4.1, confirmation of minutes of the 2nd of May as circulated, be taken as read and confirmed. I don't see any comments on those. A Mayor's communication, I'd like to table Mayor's diary and events for myself and Aldermen representing at various functions. Thank you. Item 4.3, that Council notes the workshops conducted on the 9th and 16th of May and also the agenda briefing on the 20th of May. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The Council has been considering a budget allocation for relocation of some staff to the CBD area. Should the item 8.4.2, which is listed on the Council's agenda later this evening, should Council decide not to support the GM having the delegation to enter into that lease, will that mean that those funds that have been listed in the budget for relocation of staff to the CBD area not proceed with?
Well, first of all, that's highly hypothetical at this stage, and we can deal with that decision once it's been made and the consequences of it. Secondly, the budget hasn't been set yet, and so while there is an item in the draft budget, that'll be something for Aldermen to subsequently consider, depending on the outcome of this decision at 8.4.
Thank you.
Any other comments in regard to workshops? Thank you. Tabling of petitions. Are there any? Thank you. 4.5, reports from outside bodies. The Waste Authority at Copping. Alderman Walker, anything to report?
There we go. Viewing out Zoom. There'll be something that we'll list on the next paper's agendas.
Thank you. In regard to Taswater, the quarterly report to the end of March is included in the agenda papers, and I have nothing to report at this point from the Greater Hobart Committee. Reports from Council and special committees and other representative bodies. Alderman Kennedy.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to table the April and May minutes for the Belrive Community and Arts Centre. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other reports? 4.7, reports from Council and special committees. We've done that, which takes us to 4.8, the weekly briefing reports. That Council notes the information in the reports for the 2nd, 9th and 16th of May. There being no questions there, could I invite a motion to adopt the officer's recommendations on those items? Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Second, Alderman Kennedy. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving to public question time at item 5. I have no matters on notice. Are there any questions from members of the public without notice?
want to know what's going on.
Can I invite you to come forward to the microphone just there, please? And could you open by stating your name and address, please?
My name's Tina Bourne. I live at 67 Tollard Drive, Rugby. I'm just inquiring about Tollard Drive. What's going to happen about the cars zooming down the road?
Okay.
There should have been a roundabout put up in the corner of Tollard, Boyle and Tollard Court.
I take it from your implication they're going too quickly and you're concerned from a safety point of view?
Yes.
Mr Graham, would you like to comment on that, please?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll take that one on notice and we'll go through the internal traffic working group to assess that one.
We'll reassess the safety of Tollard Drive. Thank you for that question.
Okay. I've got another lady here too.
Okay.
There's three of us.
I'm Patsy Shreve and I live in Unit 36 of 2 Joseph Street. The construction work that's happening at the back of Joseph Street, every time it rains we get flooded out. Our backyard, our front yard, even our little cul-de-sac area gets completely flooded out. We're just wondering if something could be done. They've got sandbags down in the first street of Joseph, but they're not doing much.
Thank you for that question. We will have a look at that as well, Mr Graham, and we will contact you and let you know what the outcome of our investigations to both questions. Are there any other questions from members of the public? Thank you very much. And we have no deputations from members of the public, so we'll move now on to planning matters, and I advise that Council intends to sit as planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. Item 7.1 is a development application at 224 Corella Street, Howrah, change of use to visitor accommodation. Thanks, Alderman Ewington. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Mulder. Alderman Ewington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, this sort of planning issue in relation to changing, residential houses into visitor accommodations obviously created a little bit of debate of late, and I'll be up front here and state my case is that I think that I don't agree with the idea that it takes away from. It should be treated as such a negative that we should be getting a little bit spooked by wanting to approve a development like this. I mean, the officer's report quite clearly states that the issues have been raised by the respondents at the moment. Can all be dealt with by they've all been adequately dealt with and don't hold any weight in relation to justification for knocking back this DA. I look at this proposal and I think it's probably quite a good example of a mixed use residential property that is going to provide opportunity for more than one group of people to stay at the property at one time. I've actually been through the house when it was for sale actually, and it is quite large and it is pretty much self-contained. Some of the different levels that are from the lower level through to the other levels with kitchens and adequate bathrooms. So I see this is a great mixed use opportunity for people to get to stay in areas throughout the Eastern Shore where we don't really have as much opportunity for accommodation options for people who come and visit friends and family throughout Howrah or Tranmere or Bellreef for that matter. So I think it's going to supply some of that demand, and I think that the opportunity for people to choose to do what they like to do with their own properties is something that's very important, and I think that this proposal in total I think is certainly a good one and something that's a permitted use for this type of thing in our city at the moment. I don't think there's any reason why we should be knocking this back, and I encourage my colleagues to support this proposal.
Thank you. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Unlike the mover, I do have some concerns about the disappearing of our or the reduction in the property things, and there's no way bouncing around it that there's a shortage of housing. And there's a shortage of affordable housing.
If I could interrupt, I know you're probably heading to this point anyway, but it does behove my role as chair to point out that we need to confine our arguments to planning issues, and the demand for housing is not relevant to this particular issue.
Apart from the fact that the mover of the motion made that point.
But I do urge you to respect the planning scheme and the requirements of the planning scheme, and we've had a few other examples where we would expose ourselves to administrative action if we knock this back on the basis of housing demand.
Mr Mayor, I am the second of the motion. Clearly I am in support of it, and I am not making a case for not voting against it. I am giving you a situational briefing, as did the man who moved it, and I'm saying I disagree with that thing. What I was going on to say, Mr Mayor, quite simply is that despite these concerns, I'm here as a planning authority and there are no planning reasons that this cannot be, and I was moving on, as I alerted to at the briefing on Friday, at the agenda brief on Friday, and I asked some questions that we cannot but do this because of the planning scheme. But what we can do, what I did do, is ask for some information and some advice about the proposals and the methods by which Hobart City Council, which has similar concerns to at least I, are moving forward. So I was going to put my recommendation of this in the very context that you asked me to, Mr Mayor, and I think you'll find that I still have plenty of time to digress if I wanted to.
Thank you for your understanding of the matter. Other speakers, please. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and may I say from the outset that the mover of the motion, when he said you should be able to choose and do whatever you can with your property, is really not the issues before the chair tonight. What it is a development application, Mr Mayor, and that is the very basis of which we need to consider as the planning authority. Also on page 33, under the general residential zone, there is a clause which says, and I quote, Clause 8.3.2A1 in relation to visitor accommodation, it must have a gross floor area of not more than 200 square metre. However, the subject property has a ground floor area of 440. Nevertheless, we must read on. The proposal must be considered pursuant to performance criteria P1 because it's contrary to the acceptable solutions that is in relation to the general residential zone. So it doesn't meet the acceptable solutions, and therefore we need to go and look at the performance criteria, and that's the very basis. Now, we've all seen this photo that's in our briefing papers. That is almost like a boarding house in the situation in the middle of Corella Street. Most of those other dwellings are single story. This stands out like, and I won't need to go any further and describe what, by the very nature that it lends itself to a backpacker's accommodation and a mini motel accommodation in a residential area. Now, it's contrary to the general residential zone, and I mentioned that in the beginning of the clause. In other cases where there has been a change of use to a visitor accommodation, the planning department have put a clause in there about advice. In this particular case, there's no advice. And in that case of advice, there is usually a clause which says that if there is a change in that proposal, and that is that there is a change of use where it no longer has somebody actually living on the premises, then they need to be aware that the change of use needs to be reconsidered by council down the track. That has been a standard clause that has been inserted whenever we've dealt with visitor accommodation. It doesn't appear here, and therefore I think that is a problem which we normally would consider in being able to say either in for or against this motion. The other fact that's been mentioned here is in fact the schedule of easements. Now, the planning department have said that it's not a planning matter. It doesn't come within the Clarence planning scheme local area provisions, but nevertheless, most of those people who are living in that area have abided by this, and may I quote, and it says here that he will not set up, carry or conduct upon any lot or in any building or outbuildings situate thereon any trade, manufacture or business of any kind whatsoever. Also that he will not was the dwelling house.
Alderman James, I do, as you pointed out, Alderman James, it is not a planning matter and we are obliged to contain ourselves to planning items.
I just thought I'd just mention that, Mr Mayor.
Well, you've managed to do that before I was able to say anything about it.
In clarifying that for me. Nevertheless, we wouldn't be dealing with this unless there was some reason for council to consider it. It's contrary to the general residential zone. It doesn't have the advice clause that I mentioned a moment ago, which the Planning Department have on other occasions included. I will not support this recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman James. Other speakers? Right, Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, I'm a little confused as to what I'm allowed to talk about, because I did notice that the mover of the motion spoke about non-planning issues in his support of the motion.
Yeah, I wasn't quick enough. I apologise.
Thank
Alderman
you.
Warren.
So I'm sure you'll be quick enough if I stray from the path. But I just wanted to extend my thanks to Mr Gibbs for providing some stats on the use of visitor accommodation in Clarence, because, as Alderman Mulder mentioned, it is a concern. It's a concern in other municipalities. I think it behoves us as a planning authority not just to rubber stamp things, but to look at the impact and, if necessary, raise those issues at a higher level if the planning scheme is not suiting our purposes, and if we find that it is too flexible and allows too much of our valuable accommodation to be used for visitor accommodation, to the exclusion of residents of Clarence who are unable to find somewhere affordable to live. So I do have concerns about this. I acknowledge that it meets the planning scheme. I acknowledge also that there are concerns about the traffic and the on-street parking that might result from this, and if we do approve this, I would ask that Council does monitor that closely and see if that becomes an issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. Other speakers? Right to reply, Alderman Ewing. So the motion is, the recommendation is approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 7.2 is the General Manager seeking approval to enter into a consent agreement in regarding 23 and 25 Hill Street. If I could have a mover and a seconder there, please. Alderman Ewing, thank you. Alderman Blomley. Alderman Ewington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I mean, look, this one, I think is an example of where people get together and try and find a compromise, and it looks like they've been able to come up with that. I mean, due to the changes in the scheme and different aspects of that, it created a little bit of confusion, but I think that's all been sorted out now, and the advice we've been given is that the proposal will comply with the scheme, and I think it's the only option we've got here is to approve this one. I mean, I think the reality is that allowing and making it easier for people to do infill housing and to come up with different types of housing in our city is probably one of the most critical things we'll be dealing with over the next few years. While I know some people have concerns about that,
Alderman Ewington, you're inviting us down a pathway which we aren't able to consider. Would you please be careful with your choice of words?
Okay, well, I mean, look, this one complies. I think we should, support it, and as per the recommendations of the officers, I think we have no alternative but to allow the GM to enter into a consent agreement to allow this project to move forward.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Nothing more to add. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's an interesting one, this one, because Council decided, on the advice of the officers from the Planning Department, to refuse this application some time back, and it was based on the Clarence Interim Planning Scheme of 2015. So it went to appeal on that basis, and then lo and behold, what happened? What happened next was that at the appeal process there was a discussion, and I quote, "While the application was considered and determined under the previous provisions of the Clarence Interim Planning Scheme, prior to the Interim Planning Scheme Directive Number 4 taking effect, if the amended application was lodged afresh under the current Tasmanian Planning Scheme, the design would comply with the new prescribed building envelope and privacy standards." So what they've done here is very interesting. They've actually said, OK, if this had been lodged under the Tasmanian Planning Scheme, it would have complied. So they have sort of jumbled the water here to say, well, look, if it had been lodged under the new planning scheme, then it would have been approved. But this was lodged under the interim planning scheme. And therefore, through common sense and any other particular matters, you would have thought that the officer's recommendation to refuse, which was supported by this council, and I can't recall the numbers, but I think it was 9-3 or something like that. But anyway, the point of my making here is that it wasn't approved under the new planning scheme. And for some reason or another, there was discussion, and now we are asked to provide our consent to this because the people or the discussion at the planning appeals was on the basis that it would have been approved under the new planning scheme when in fact it was lodged under the old. So what do? The planning department put forward a worthy recommendation which was supported by this council, and we carried it almost unanimously because on their advice, and then it was taken out of our hands. It went to the appeal process, there was discussion there, and for some reason or another, perhaps the legal department that advises council thought, oh, well, look, there's not much difference here between the old planning scheme and the new one. Oh, what the heck. We will say it goes through. There were some amended plans, I admit, but the basis of this is right here in the documentation, and therefore it only stands for reason that this council, if it approves this, is going to basically say, well, the old planning scheme didn't matter, the new one came in after the event, so we will sign off and tick it off. I will not support this because it's contrary to what the decision on the recommendation of the officers was back then. And now we are going to probably provide consent under the new planning scheme. And that is just an absolute injustice, in my opinion, to the way we do business in this place.
Thank you, Alderman James. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And being one of those who voted with the officers' decision to refuse, I was here. And had we, and I would strongly encourage that people attend the agenda brief and listen to the discussions at those agenda briefs, or at least look at them online afterwards, because a lot of the points that are being made were discussed at the agenda brief. Answers and things were given and supplied, and I will say that I accepted the officer's previous recommendation. We have amended plans in here. Those plans were subject to an appeal. The representatives chose not to be joined to the appeal, as is their right, which meant that they weren't to become party to any consent agreements that may be reached. Yes, that is a bad thing. What I also raised at Friday's agenda brief was that had these sets of plans been submitted with the amendments that have been made, had they been the original plan, then it wouldn't have even gone to advertising because they met the acceptable solutions. And that was the advice we were given, and I'm happy for it to be contradicted if that's not the case. But as it meets the acceptable solutions, as it wouldn't have had to go out to advertising, then it's appropriate that these things are done this way. For one, and I've said this previously, I would prefer a different process. I would prefer a pre-mediation process before it goes to the tribunal, so that these sorts of issues can be sorted out, and that maybe we wouldn't have even gone to an appeal, and maybe we would have had some compliant plans submitted in the first place, in which case we wouldn't be here. But having said all that, and the fact that the amendments to the plans now make it conform to the acceptable solution, here I stand, I can do no other, and the only reason that we're here talking to it tonight is because these plans were not the ones originally submitted, because if they had been, we wouldn't have even had the first discussion.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Other speakers? Right, a reply. The motion is that we authorise the GM to enter a consent agreement. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. And that concludes our business as a planning authority, which takes us through to governance. Item 8.4.1 is that the quarterly report to the 31st of March be received. You moving it, Alderman?
Well, I'll let one of my colleagues move it.
Thank you, Alderman Edmonds, seconded Alderman Kennedy. Alderman, would you like to speak to it? Alderman Edmonds.
I'm sure plenty of people have got. I don't have any questions this quarter. Just to say thanks again to all the hard work that goes into producing it.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just reiterating Alderman Edmonds' comments.
Thank you. Alderman James, you ready to speak to it?
I am. Thanks, Mr Mayor. On page 5, it refers to, amongst other things, Kangaroo Bay Development Precinct, and in it says Kangaroo Council approved the development application for Kangaroo Bay Boulevard at a special meeting in November 2021. Sale of the land is currently being negotiated with the developer. My question through you to Mr Nelson, his capacity as General Manager. Mr Nelson, when this sale is being negotiated, is it appropriate or is it the necessary course of, in the process, that the valuer general will put a value on the land, and if he or she does, is council able to negotiate down or up, or is council and the proponent who obviously wants to purchase the land have to abide by the valuer general's decision on the value of the land and those blocks in question, please?
Yeah. Through you, Mayor. Thank you for the question, Alderman James. The Council has previously agreed a sale and development agreement with the developer. That specifies within it that the Valuer General will provide the valuation for sale and within a time frame. That's been done. That information is now with the developer and we're waiting for their feedback on how they'd like to proceed. So essentially, I think the short answer is everything that needed to be was in the sale and development agreement. When we talk about negotiating, we're not talking about negotiating the price. What we're talking about is the process of sale, and there are some details around that. But we're waiting to hear back from the developer at this stage.
And a supplementary question, Mr Mayor, through you. Is there any negotiation, any wriggle room that may be on the part of council and the prospective purchaser of those blocks in relation to what the Valuer General has stipulated as being the sale price of those individuals?
Look, I'm going to answer that. The General Manager's already said that price is not being negotiated, that there's a clear requirement to settle on the valuation provided by the Valuer General.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other? Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And like the mover of the motion, I'd like to commend the GM and his team on a fantastic presentation. It's very informative and obviously a very good story to tell. I'd like to move, Mr Mayor, to page 52 under Council's Assets and Resources, 6.5 under Human Resource Management, and note that it's anticipated an initial staff engagement survey will be delivered in May, subject to successful ELI process. Has that survey started?
Through you, Mayor. I understand at this point that we have received expressions of interest and they have been considered, but I haven't received advice regarding an appointment at this point, but it should be imminent. I can take that on notice and provide some additional information if that helps.
Thank you. And Mr Mayor, also, once the survey has been conducted, I think it would be helpful for the Alderman to be apprised of the results of that survey, please. Yep. On to page 54, under 6.11, statutory and legal responsibilities, install parking sensors in the city. We're told that tender has been prepared and a project manager engaged to complete this project and it's in progress. We provided with an up-to-date, where that's at, sort of a status. Are they being rolled out through the city? What areas are the parking sensors being installed?
I'll need to take that one on notice. Mr Tui's had carriage of that and he's on leave, so I just need to get those extra details and I'll provide those.
Thank you, General Manager. And finally, Mr Mayor, and this is one that I put to the former CFO, and I think I'm going to get the same response, but I note that on page 57 our employee costs are $1 million under. There's a variance of $1 million, and is that because there are positions that have not been filled, or is there another reason as to why we're seeing a variance to this degree? Maybe through to the CFO.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, that is the reason. The number of positions not filled for a period of time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Any other queries on the quarterly report? Right to reply, Alderman Edmonds.
No, thank you.
Okay, so the motion is we receive the quarterly report. All those in favour?
It's unanimous.
And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Which takes us to item 8.4.2. It's a matter of delegation, and I note that there's a alternative recommendation from the General Manager following on from our agenda briefing. Has everyone got a copy of that? It now comprises Part A and Part B. Part A is ensuring that there's advance notice to the Alderman before the General Manager signs a lease of 7 days, and Part B authorises the GM to proceed in regard to the Rosny Park 3/10 Bayfield Street.
Mr Mayor, may I ask a question, please? In the flurry of emails that I've seen over the last couple of, well, probably today and Friday, there was talk of being 10 days notice.
Through you, Mayor.
Look, this is just clarifying the question that's going to be put on the table.
I was about to say, Mr Mayor, look, surely if Alderman Bloming wants to move the motion, then let's have the debate. But at the moment, he's
procedurally, that would be a reasonable way forward.
I would have thought so.
It would indeed, but 7 is what's been circulated as the alternative recommendation.
Well, I didn't draft it, so I'm not moving it. So,
yeah.
If you want to move it,
so if someone is prepared to move as circulated, thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Seconded, Alderman Edmonds. Would you like to speak to it, Alderman Kennedy?
Well, at this point in time with the amendments, and I'm not quite sure about the clarification of the 7 and 10 days, but as we discussed on Friday, that was what we actually arrived at, so I'm happy to move it.
Thank you. Alderman Evans.
Yeah, I'm happy to second it as well, because this is exactly what I asked for when we workshopped this, is that is there a way that we can do it so that it's on the public record in a council meeting, people understand where we're at. So I'm really appreciative of the fact that we are doing this in open meeting, so everyone understands why it's happening. It's in the report for people to come back and read whenever they want. I am more than happy to second it. And just to also say that, in my view, this is on Part B, it's operational decision support, allowing people to do their job without having to be hamstrung by 6 or 9 week delays on some of this sort of stuff. So that's fine. And I think I can, to use language some of my colleagues use, take comfort in the fact that no GM in their right mind is going to go crazy with this sort of... they'll be pulled up pretty quickly. And we have pretty thorough processes around GM reviews. And indeed, if things got really hairy, we've got our own way of moving motions and things like that. So I take comfort in the fact that you've got to allow people to do their job. This is an operational decision, it has my support. What else could we do? And I just appreciate, just again, put on public record, I really appreciate the way this has been done as openly as we could to make sure people understand the issues and can't run off in different directions. So thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Edmonds. Other speakers? Alderman Moller.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a question, because in the latter part of those emails, the General Manager also suggested a specific delegation for this particular event so that he didn't have to wind the clock back 7 or 10 days in the emails. So I'm just wondering, did we want that to be part of this motion for the practical reasons?
Are you referring to what's there as item B now, Alderman Moller?
Sorry, yes, Mr Mayor. I, like the others, had only just hadn't seen the alternative on the paper. So I'm happy. Yes, I'll also take the blame, if that's the point, for raising the issue about putting the piece of yellow and the piece in yellow, which is the 7 days, to give some consultation time with the councils, as something that I raised at the briefing on Friday, and also that I will mirror the discussion on Friday at the briefing, which says that a general manager's lifespan may be severely curtailed if this kind of delegation is misused.
Alderman Bromley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And Mr Mayor, I'm fully supportive of this delegation. And the only reason why I raised the issue with the 7 or 10 was because of the email trail that we've all read over the last 24, 48 hours. As I said on Monday during the long budget workshop when this issue was raised, then we employ a professional to perform the duty of general manager. He does that well, and we've got to give him the room to get on and do his job, and he can't be hamstrung by red tape. Obviously, there has to be some parameters. He's very clear of what those parameters are. We're very clear as well. I think this gives everyone a sense of comfort, to borrow a phrase. But importantly, though, Mr Mayor, it is transparent, and we know the reasons why Part B is there, and why we'll be looking at that very shortly. And that's probably a debate to have in a few moments' time. But I think this is a very sound motion, and very happy to support this, either 7 or 10. I was recently careless. I just wanted some clarification. I've got that now, and happy to support this very sound motion.
Thank you, Alderman Bromley. Other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I did raise the 7-day notice because simply, if this occurred and we want to discuss it, at least it gave us a chance for, in most cases, a workshop. Now, if it's 7 or 10, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. But the only thing that concerns me a little, if we go ahead with Part B, which I'm sure we will, and we've got the period of 3 years for a lease on 310 Bayfield Street, somewhere along the line we've got to make, well, the new council has to make some tough decisions on what's going to happen. That's not our job. I believe it's a job for the new council, but somewhere in the back of our mind, we've got to keep that there. Thank you, Mayor.
Other speakers? Right reply.
I wish to speak, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Bomberto, and then Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not convinced as to why the delegation's required. I've been a council almost 15 years and it hasn't been requested before. I believe that the proposed delegation is too general, it's too open-ended. As noted in the report, leases from another party usually occur in a tracks and trails context, often from the Crown and for nominal amounts of rent. This is a type of lease that could be undertaken via a delegation, but currently they have a budget allocation in an annual plan and therefore have in essence been approved or endorsed by the Alderman by Council. For me to support the recommended delegation, there would need to be a rider that the allocation of funds has been formally endorsed by Council at a Council meeting. The idea of notice of the lease being given by the General Manager via the Alderman's weekly briefing is not the level of endorsement I'd be seeking. Weekly briefings include 4 information documents. And that is all. The next level up is what is known as a straw poll at an alderman's workshop. But such decisions are not formal determinations and are not formally minuted. Most leases of property from another party are not urgent, and there's a reasonable amount of time for deliberations, negotiations. Therefore, there's time to bring the matter to Council for determination. In the report, it refers to the lease of council land being delegated to the General Manager. That's a very different scenario to what is being proposed here. That involves the addition to Council's income. However, the proposed delegation relates to an expenditure of funds and therefore needs to have parameters and scrutiny placed upon it by a full Council determination. In relation to the specific example given in the report, there's been no specific determination by Council, neither as a specific item at a Council meeting, or an allocation of funds within the council estimates. At an Alderman's workshop on the 26th of April of this year, 3 options were suggested by the General Manager for the accommodation of staff. One being the use of part of Alma's Activity Centre, owned by Council, but with no costings as to the changes that would be required. The other 2 being for the leasing of one of 2 properties within Bayfield Street. But no decision was made at that workshop, and nor should it have been, and no decision has been made as yet as part of the budget deliberations, which have not been completed. I cannot support either part of this motion.
Thank you, Alderman von Bertha. Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. And may I just take a point from my colleague Alderman Edmonds when he referred to an operational decision which should vest in the hands of the staff or executive. This is quite different because in this particular case we haven't decided on what is going to be expended as far as what's in the budget for 22-23, and this particular matter has been listed for consideration for Council to spend ratepayers' money on relocating 5 or 6 personnel from this establishment to Bayfield Street in order to sort of overcome the accommodation problem that exists in this place. So it is a matter for us to determine, not on an operational decision, because it's our budget. It's the 12 elected representatives who decide on this, and therefore we need to have a say on this as to whether or not it proceeds or otherwise. Now, getting back to what is being proposed here, this is a very, very general delegation, and the numbers around this table may be a lot different after October 2022. But this decision, if it goes through, is going to bind Council for the next 3 years, unless there is a decision brought forward to revoke it or rescind it, and that is very, very difficult, particularly when you have new faces around this place who would, as a basis of trying to learn the ropes, would in fact try to say, well, look, we don't want to change anything at this point in time. So it's too late for that new council to make a decision to revoke it. The wording of this, subject to providing advice of any proposed lease to the council via a briefing report at least 7 days before signing. It's a fait accompli. Ipso facto, that the fact of the matter is done, because we are going to be advised of the matter and we have no say in it. If we're being advised that he's going to sign this lease, then in fact, what can we do? We can't say, we can revoke that, we can't say, no, it's not right, because we have made a decision here that, subject to providing advice of any proposed lease, isn't that general? Any proposed lease to council via a briefing report for 7 days before signing. So that is saying any lease that this council is advised of 7 days is just no power in the council to determine otherwise, because we are giving approval at this point in time for that to happen. And it just doesn't make sense that this is not transparent. Part B does concern and makes some of our members around in this place happy with the fact that it's going to be included in the estimates for 2022, and we haven't made that decision yet. And I alluded to in the first part of the meeting, Mr Mayor, because I felt that really, this is really premature to be able to make a decision that, in fact, the estimates haven't been ratified. What's to say we decide not to approve relocation of 5 or 6 staff from this place to Bayfield Street in the estimates when we hand down the budget decision at the end of this month? What's to say that? Does that mean, Mr Mayor, that this does not proceed, or does it mean that this is a fairly open and embodies a whole range of possibilities? So if we don't proceed to approve the odd, whatever it is, 60,000 or 70,000, whatever it is, in the budget for relocation of the staff, it still allows the General Manager to make a decision on a lease on behalf of the citizens of Clarence, and only by advising us 7 days before the deed is done. It's really wrong. This is wrong. And I just don't feel that we should be binding another council, a new council, when in fact this is giving far-reaching powers and responsibility to a General Manager who is the Chief Executive of this organisation, where we have the responsibility to look after and act on behalf of the residents of this place and make sure that we are not bound to an executive decision made by the General Manager.
Mr Mayor, Alderman James raised a number of questions and I was hoping someone would answer them, and I think some of the answers are actually in the motion itself. And I think for the matter of the public, I think those questions need to be answered about how binding would be the lease if we didn't approve the budget.
Yeah, look, I'm quite satisfied, quite happy to answer that. There is absolutely no way this lease can be approved if there's no provision in the budget for it. And that's the safety guard, that's the assurance that the public can take, this council can take, and that needs to be stated in black and white. And it needs to be understood, Alderman James, that there is no way this lease can proceed unless it's given budgetary approval.
And that is stated in black and white, Mr Mayor.
Sorry?
That is stated in black and white in the motion.
Absolutely, yeah. Alderman Ewington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, other than wasting a little bit more time on this issue, which has taken way too long already, anything that streamlines governance and the administration of our city and the business is a good thing in my mind. I mean, we all hear about the cost of living increases going through the roof, and every time we waste time talking about trivial little things like this that have been dealt with internally in workshops, and we've all agreed to go down this path, to then want to grandstand and spend more time talking about this sort of stuff.
Alderman Ewington, it's not appropriate to place on the record that one of your colleagues is talking for that purpose.
Well,
you have to take the issues as they stand.
Okay, well, anyway, look, the issue here is that nothing's going to happen without the approval of council. You know, it's quite clear what's going on here. We make decisions every day that have to be dealt with by any council and future council, after an election. So we do that already. So all these arguments about not going down that path, I can't see. And I think sooner we can just get on with the simple stuff, approve it without making it bigger than what it needs to be, to allow the GM to get on with doing what he needs to do to make a safe working environment for our staff is a good thing. And I think it's quite simple for us to move forward and approve this motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply?
No.
I'm sorry, Alderman Walker.
I even had my theoretical Zoom hand up. Look, the comfort quote has been made, and there is that in through this process. Going to go into grandstanding or any other matters like that. We have to accommodate staff in adequate facilities. That's not a decadent statement. And we also have to have ways for a general manager to be able to deal with contracts in a reasonable, efficient way. And this allows that, but still gives us oversight. We can still do what we probably do more than other councils, which is go through the line-by-line expenditure items through every budget process, and we still will be able to do that. I could be wrong. And here's the thing. If I've got it wrong, this process is one notice of motion away from being changed and reverting back to the previous circumstance. That's all. So you've got to try things out, and this doesn't seem like a risky experiment by any way, so I am supporting it.
Thank you, Alderman Walker. Alderman Kennedy, right, a reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wasn't quite expecting that, but I thank colleagues for their contribution, and also to Alderman Mulder for pointing out the underlined subject to funding approval being received. There's nothing here to alarm anyone. Really, we're living in this ever-changing, fast world where we as a council have to start thinking about being a lot more flexible in our decision-making and to have our faith and trust in our general manager to be able to get on in making these decisions. We're talking about it being operational. This is operational, and we are here to think strategically, and we're getting bogged down with this detail. So I thank my colleagues for their contribution. I urge you to support this because this just makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. So the recommendation is the alternative recommendation for delegation. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on to notices of motion. Alderman Walker, Woodstead Grey. I've lost you. Just see if we can get your sound. We're working on it. Can you hear me? Alderman Walker, if you can hear me, put your thumb up. Okay. So it's your audio that we've lost at the moment. We'll just see what we can pick up if you bear with us for a moment.
So...
we've got you now.
I wish to move the motion as standing in my name.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Walker.
Thank you. I better run through it. You can see what's listed there, and the first bit is that it does acknowledge the elapsed length of time, and that's even from the 2013 master plan, but also the 2019 motion that I had that was unanimously supported, that we put it on hold for about a year to revisit and look at improving and giving the area something befitting of its natural splendour. That morphed into something a little bit bigger, which was the master plan in a big way. And what this motion notes is that that's now been significantly progressed, and we're going to even be discussing it next month. Let's put some other points around it. That we do expedite. That after the workshop we expedite the community consultation on the draft master plan. And the bit here then is D, which is what there may be some debate around, which is prioritise the design work for the bit around the Big Esplanade precinct as part of the 22-23 budget process. I think that this will be front of mind when we finalise the budget. But it's really, as I say, it's we're looking at the sort of the design, the work for the tendering and construction, not the actual rolling out of the contract there and then sight unseen. So look, this is a really valued part of our coast. It's heavily utilised, not just by the locals, not just by wider Clarence, but indeed, southern Tasmania and tourists from afar. We've all seen that COVID has increased the utilisation of areas such as these. And there is a master plan that's being developed, and I think that this is the judicious bit to do in between as we start the process. And also it goes back to the fact of that 10 years. So this is a way, it's important that I think I speak on behalf of all of us to express our gratitude to the hard work that the Coast Care groups have done in that area. But, we need to step up as well. I didn't actually support the Bellerive Bluff Master Plan in 2013 because I didn't think it was befitting of the location. Again, I thank you all for the support of that motion I put a little over 3 years ago, but given nearly 10 years has elapsed since that master plan, understandably some community patience has been tested. Now, I really want to emphasise this motion doesn't pre-commit council to anything more than the consultation, the design work, so that this process would be ready for consideration in a following budget year. Now, I have had a concern raising it over the weekend, and I want to say I appreciate it when people provide feedback in a timely manner where I can think it over, and it's been about 2 days worth of time for me to reflect on it. And I've also consulted with others, and the concern was raised that don't want to pre-commit to council to something without a number or to something sight unseen. This motion doesn't do this. This motion is not a blank cheque to future works. What it is doing is getting the design works underway so that there is something needed to be considered, ideally in the next financial year, but ready to roll. and I just seek your support.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't think there's much more I can add to that other than probably one of the first meetings I had with community in this role more than 3 years ago was with a group of residents around that area, and there's a number of us here tonight that actually met with them and we listened to what they had to say, and I'm very pleased to support this motion because at least we are now starting to move ahead with it. So I thank the mover of the motion and I seek council's support.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Blomley and then Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And like the seconder, I too thank the mover for this very sound motion before us this evening. It's concerning to me, Mr Mayor, that as with, it seems, all our master plans, they just seem to, not only are there so many of them, they all seem to take so much time. The wheels move so slowly. On the way here tonight, I was reminded that it's over 2 years ago that I dealt with Sophie Harris, a cabbages florist in Belrive, about the safety petition that was there. And I get stopped, as she does too, and asked what's happening there. Oh, it's on the master plan. And you look around our city and there are countless master plans. And now it's time, I think, that we really need to bite the bullet. It's up to us as directors to make some hard decisions, absolutely, not shy away from that. Whether it's a master plan that we're talking about here, whether it's a master plan for Kilston Bay, or it's a master plan for Anzac Park, or the other countless other master plans that our staff are trying to manage and deliver for the residents of Clarence. It's important that we don't kick the can down the road anymore. We've got to put our money where our mouth is, and we have to invest. We have to invest in getting this right. And let's be honest, Belrive is tired. Belrive is tired. It is the jewel in the crown of Clarence and it's tired. It deserves investment. Yeah, one only has to look at, with Dan Murphy's now coming in there and Percy Street and the lack of parking throughout there. There's a particular building that I understand will soon be addressed, which will do something to lift that part of our city. I mean, not only were the businesses and the residents hit with stormwater earlier this year, many of them being so adversely affected by that flooding event, but they're sort of crying out for some love. And that's what we should be delivering. It's not hard. We just need to make a decision, put some money where our mouths are, and actually invest in this beautiful part of our city because they deserve it.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds.
Thanks very much. I'm in support of the motion tonight. The asterisk I put on it is that we do know that the dollar figures might get pretty eye-watering in this part of the world, but if you get the work done, you can start asking people to help. And I think we've seen with the flurry of people trying to... some groups were trying to lobby for federal money, a week before an election. I think you've got to get your ducks in a row. As we've seen, the people who seem to get funding, they build the community case for the funding. They go out, they talk to the state and federal governments and they say, this is what we've got, this is a priority of ours, this is what we need to do it, what do you reckon? And then they have time to go around their own communities and put it through the proper processes, hopefully, and can win the argument. I don't think this is even if it's broken up into tranches or stages or whatever, is something that we're going to be able to easily just write a cheque for from the way that our budget management goes. So I think I am supportive of something that gets the legwork done, has the consultation done, has the designs done, and then when we're trying to get help, we've got all those questions answered. And you only have to see the places that are well organised are the ones that get help. And I think you can't bemoan a lack of attention if you're not prepared to do a bit of work yourself. So I think with that being said, maybe not quite as passionate as my colleague next to me, but I agree with the sentiment, so yeah, I'm happy to support.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Yeah, I have a dissenting voice, and I agree with some of the previous speakers that we've got too many master plans and we've got too many of them, and I think I have been the architect at several times of almost tongue-in-cheek saying we need a master plan to prioritise the master plans because we've got so many of them. And they're all plans, and they're all out there, and they're all done. And what this motion tries to do is to grab one of them and prioritise it. I'm sort of a little reluctant about prioritising it for the precinct for design and construction. We've just been through torturous days of having to put our hands on our hearts and kick projects, our pet projects, down the road because of the rates, because of the costs, and the fact is that we are facing difficult times with the cost of these works, with the projects of these works. So to then say, you know, we're trying to preempt some of the discussions that we've had, and I don't think there's been any agreement around the table that this necessarily, the two steps involved. Now, I can given the fact that where we're at and some of the stuff that's gone on in the past and the age of this one, that maybe we should be considering, you know, in our deliberations for the design. When I get concerned is that the idea of that design is basically already putting us in the position where we are going to have to, you know, we'll now have to go out if we don't commence this in the following year, and we've got no idea whether we're going to be able to deliver the projects we have committed to date. And so we're then creating an expectation that we're going to do that then, and now we're going to have to, and then we're going to have to go and do what exactly this motion is trying to do. This motion is trying to set up some expectations, and I think that's fine, but then we don't want to be in a position where we set up all those expectations and then we run away a mile. I'm all for getting it shovel ready, and I'm prepared to perhaps say, well, maybe as part of those discussions, we need to whack that into the projects that we've almost finalised the capital works program, and we parachute that one in for at least the design work. But I think it's a bridge too far for the project to be shovel ready. And if the mover and the seconder are happy to delete all the words after shovel ready, I think I could possibly, with the qualifications I've added some support. So all we're doing is saying we're giving this particular project a bit of priority in terms of design to move it to the next stage, but without any expectation that we will know what the circumstances are going to be like this time next year. So I'd like to move to request the mover and the seconder's amendment to that, to request approval for that amendment.
Mover, Alderman Walker.
Look, again, I think I do appreciate that I wasn't somersaulted on this, that I gave it time for consideration. I believe that there is enough comfort around it because we talk about in order.
Mr. Mayor.
So in order for the project to be shovel ready, so that it
point of order, Mr. Mayor. It was a procedural question.
So I think that we have the comfort we need, and that this isn't pre-committing council to a blank cheque in the next financial year, but it is. Definitely.
Look, things are getting out of hand there. I'm sorry. The procedural question was whether or not the mover was happy to move it, accept your change, and he's not, as I read it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Then all I can say is that I'll give some comfort, and I cannot support this motion simply because it is preempting an awful lot of work that we've been doing. I'm not saying the project isn't worthy. I'm not saying that the area isn't tired. But if I went back through all our other plans and bits and pieces, I think we might come up with some areas that are more tired, that have never been properly designed, have never been renovated in the past, and are at the point where they're almost non-functional, and yet this area remains functional.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Any other speakers? Alderman Newcombe?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, first of all, you know, I want to say that I support the upgrade and improvements to Victoria Esplanade. There's no doubt about that. I think we're all in that same boat there. I mean, also I think that I support an upgrade and a change and a review of the master plan at Belrive Beach as well, and some improvements to the area there. Also support changes to Wentworth Park, Little Harrop Beach. You know, it goes on. I mean, really, what this comes down to, this whole debate about our master plans and where we're going with all this is the bottom line is that we've got to get back to what we think is the core thing that we need to do for the community. And I believe that this infrastructure type stuff in terms of improving the amenity of all our parks and recreational areas is our number one, other than the basic service provision in terms of roads and rubbish and those sort of things. And I think if we're really serious about moving this forward, a motion like this really doesn't help, because it doesn't solve the problem that we've got internally in terms of the resourcing we allocate to this area of council. And the plans that we've got in place in order to fund some of this stuff, you know, rather than a year to year in a budget cycle, but we look at a 2 or 3 and a 5 year plan, which is something that I think we really need to do in relation to our parks and playgrounds, incorporating things like Victoria Esplanade. You know, and the only way that's going to happen without us increasing rates is to look at whether we really do need to keep some of the other services and programs that we run that, you know, we could allocate those resources to some of these sorts of things. And I think that's really the debate that we need to have. And I'd encourage the community to get involved in that as well, because I think it's up to them to let us know what they think we should be doing too. I mean, the issue here too is, you know, to sort of agree with some of the points that Alderman Mulder made there. You know, if we prioritise this one, well, I don't know what's going to miss out if we do that. You know, let alone in terms of the funding of the design work at this stage, and when there's probably 5 or 6 other things that we could be looking at. But I do support this, but we can't look at these sorts of individual projects in isolation like this, no matter how much we actually support the need to go down this path and actually make improvements to this area, which I certainly do. I mean, bottom line is, if it makes no difference if no dollars is involved, well then what's the real need for this motion at all? I mean, we've already made a decision as a council to do the first draft of the master plan. It's all moving forward. I think it's a bit premature, and to be honest, I think, you know, making these sorts of decisions by motions on notice is not the ideal way for us as a council to move forward and make these sorts of decisions. I think it's more appropriate for us to look at the whole range of things that we've got in front of us, and then look at prioritising that in relation to all the other projects that are there, not just cherry-picking one item. I mean, I've got plenty of things I'd like to put forward as well, but I think in this instance, this is all going to happen. You know, we're going to have to deal with the community expectations and liaise with the community and get their feedback on stuff. But you know, I think it's going down a path that I don't think is the best way to go, no matter how much we'd like to see this area improve. So look, I can't support it in the way it is. I mean, if you took out all of D, I'd be more than happy to vote for it all, because it's really what we've already decided to do. But I just think prioritising and that sort of thing, I think it's going down a path that I'm not comfortable with. But like at the same time, I'm fully supportive of us moving down and improving the amenity of the community and the recreational opportunities that we provide. But I just think it's unnecessary at the moment, and I think moving forward, you know, we've got opportunity to, you know, still achieve this without necessarily locking ourselves into something which I really don't see as necessary at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Alderman Walker, for bringing this. I did have a discussion with Alderman Walker that I thought bringing this motion was a bit probably premature, simply because the things in Belrive we're discussing now, one of those is time limits and what we're going to do with certain streets, and it may change what we want to do in certain areas here with the ferry. So that did worry me a bit, I've got to be honest. I can support it because, you know, we've got to move on. I'm pleased to see now that other aldermen are saying what I've been saying. We've got so many master plans that we could not possibly fund, could not possibly do, and we keep asking for a master plan for this and that. I think it's about time we just did, similar to what Alderman Ewington said, certain things we've just got to get on with and budget with the master plans we've got, because all we're doing is giving staff extra work when we're short-staffed already. I think on the Sport and Rec Committee, we wanted 90,000 master plans for everything. To me, that's ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous everything what the master plan to, and we knew we wasn't going to fund it. Times are tough now, as Aldermen are finding out. This budget is pretty tough, and we've still got to cut. So, you know, when things like this happen, I've been through tough budgets before, and so has other aldermen. You know you've got to cut, so you've got to be very careful what you do. But anyway, I'll support this motion of Alderman Walker's.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And it's very interesting that Part D has been dropped on us at the last minute, because we've spent 2 full days on basically the capital works budget and also on the revenue. And at the last meeting we had a new request for a tracks and trails coordinator thrown at us at the last minute, and that was basically hadn't been listed. And here we have prioritising the design work for a pier Victoria Esplanade precinct as part of it. So what we are doing is we're throwing a few dollars into this particular proposal, and it has to be now reworked in the budget process because it's come in at the last minute. Now, this is not the way we do business in this place. We're not directors of this corporation. We are elected representatives of the Clarence City Council, and therefore we have an obligation to make sure that we wisely look through these budgets and call it our own, not the officer's budget. I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but call it our own and make decisions accordingly. So to drop this in front of us at this last minute, and there's not a lot of information out there for the people to say, well, what are we going to do? We're going to put a few beautification plants and do a little bit of landscaping on on Victoria Esplanade. You know, it doesn't tell the people of Clarence in the explanatory memorandum. It just goes on and just basically says that the Victoria Esplanade suggestion should be prioritised to meet reasonable community expectations. Well, reasonable community expectations cover the city of Clarence, not just the Victoria Esplanade. And so what I'm saying to this meeting is that I don't think we should do that. We should not be prioritising the design work for the pier. It's going to cost money. It's going to be dropped into us at this stage when we're basically starting to tick off on the capital works budget or program as well as the revenue. So, and also to have it ready, shovel ready for the 23-24. Again, I go back to what I said in one of the earlier debates, Mr Mayor, and that is you're going to basically lock it in, although you can say, oh no, it's being considered. But you really are setting the scene here where you are prioritising design, and therefore the next step is the actual doing the work, because of the next council, and if it's a new bunch of people, which I anticipate it will be, some new faces here, that the fact of the matter is that we may be locked into this particular decision to actually undertake the works in 23-24. I will not support the recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman James. Any other speakers? Right reply, Alderman Walker.
Look, I do thank everyone for their contributions. I think people have raised important points, whether they've raised them in support or in sometimes saying the open reason why they're not going to back this motion. I worked on this several weeks ago and pretty much had it ready to go and start liaising before, straight after the last council meeting. We have actually discussed this now in the Capital Works Marathon event. So I don't accept the suggestion that I've just somersaulted and dropped this out of nowhere. That just is wrong. Again, I point to the 10-year timeline. I pointed to the previous unanimous motion around suspending for a year so that we could rework it. That got delayed a little bit. There was a thing called COVID, but there was also the master plan which was done. This isn't a new master plan. This is just getting the details done. So it's in a shovel-ready state. That can be deployed and considered. You're not locked into things in the future budget. However, I think it'll make a very worthy case, because what is this? This isn't a special interest project. This is a widely utilised bit of trail and bit of coastline. Widely used, not just by the locals, not just by the whole wider area of Clarence, but beyond. And we've seen more of that since the ferries have come through and there's other events. So It's a modest amount that's being asked. It's prudent, judicious, it's come a long way. I thank everyone for their contributions, and I note the points around weaving a theme around how we go about things in future, and I'm more than up for those conversations. So I seek your support.
Thank you. So the motion is as presented by Alderman Walker. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Against? 1, 2, 3. The motion is carried. Item 9.2, notice motion, Alderman Edmonds.
I wish to move that motion.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you very much. As was foreshadowed 3 weeks ago at the meeting, I said that this would be coming, and that is that we look to amend the dog management policy from 2021. Gee, I'm struggling with that. And to some changes to some definitions, or some updates to some definitions around working dogs and racing greyhounds, as is in the motion, and that the level of those fees be 50% of the rate for an entire dog. To do this, we need a motion to carry tonight, and then point B is to do the community consultation around that decision, and so on into point C. And as the notes say, historically the council did provide racing greyhounds and working dogs a discount for licence fees, and the numbers for the removal of that concession shows the significant bill shock that we created when we went from about $46.80 to $119.10. And then, you know, that setting the fees at 50% at the entire dog rate is consistent with the rate set for the Tasmanian Canine Association. So as I said, this was an issue that started to come up with us last July, and I believe we were approached by more from the greyhound side of things than the working dogs. But I can also remember raising this in emails middle of last year with colleagues and seeking a pathway forward to deal with this issue, because it hadn't really been captured in the way we went about our dog management policy. It has been a long road, and I think having time over again maybe should have... it's okay to raise something, but maybe we should have worked harder to really make people understand that you did want to actually bring this for discussion, which we're obviously doing now. I thank the General Manager and Mr Toohey for their work with the actual motion now that we've got to the place that we're at. Really for me the issue is about fairness. It's a fairness issue. I've just run through the numbers and the intense spike in costs that's created. And the thing is that this was the fee raised that these stakeholder groups weren't aware of. They didn't have a chance to make a submission under our dog policy consultation that we obviously all remember so fondly from about 12 months ago. I would have preferred for this to have been worked through like some of the other issues at the time, or indeed for us to have done more workshopping of it. Unfortunately, the timelines have led us to the pathway that we're on tonight, and we have to just have a vote. But we do have that public consultation up our sleeve. It's really just my view that when our decisions, and the dog management one is obviously a huge decision, and caught in that is some unintended consequences that have a really high and I would say unfair impact on certain groups, we have a duty to address them. So that's why I seek the support of my colleagues tonight.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't think there's much more that I need to say on that one. This is pretty straightforward as far as I'm concerned, and I'd like to thank Alderman Edmonds for listening to so many affected dog owners and bringing this motion to council, and like he, I seek council support.
Thank you. Other speakers?
It's more of a question, Mr Mayor.
If you...
Yes, sorry. So the fees for the dog, they start from 1st July, so no one would have paid it before now, but that's what we're suggesting that it would be from.
It's not appropriate to enter a discussion at this stage.
How does it work?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah.
Right of reply?
It needs to be in the right of reply, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, as long as whether you've thought about the implications if anyone's paid in advance and how that would be treated, that's all I'm interested in. But other than that, I think it makes sense.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Other speakers? Alderman Blomley.
Hey, thank you, Mr Mayor, and I think this is a very sound motion. I was, during Alderman Edmonds' opening comments there, looking around the chamber, sort of wondering how many of us are conflicted as dog lovers. But I don't think any of us own greyhounds or working dogs, but my dog...
Racing greyhounds, yeah.
Racing greyhounds, yeah. My dog's beautiful, but she's no working dog, let me tell you. But can I just say, Mr Mayor, that anything that can assist particularly those that take retired racing greyhounds into their homes via the Tas Racing's greyhound adoption program based out of Bangalore is a very good thing. And I'm aware from approaches that I've also received from different groups, particularly owners of retired racing greyhounds, of the need to obviously have an opportunity to have them well homed, well housed, and I think this will go some way to ensuring that does happen. I know it's not only about greyhounds, it's also about working dogs, and growing up on a farm, I know how important they are. But Mr Mayor, I think this is a very sensible motion. Clearly there'll be a bit of a clip to the bottom line, and we're all very conscious of that. We're focused on the budget, but I think that this is something that we all ought to support. Thank you.
Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
I wasn't. I've just got some concerns here that the previous speaker referred to encouraging gap dog adoption program dogs. This will have zero impact, is the way I gather it, because if it did, I would be declaring a conflict of interest, because I do own, we do own two adopted greyhounds, but I can rest assure you they are not racing greyhounds, and they certainly don't fit the definition of workers. They're as lazy as all get-go. But I think that this is not about adopted programs. This does nothing to ease or encourage or increase the adoptability of greyhounds. That may be done if perhaps the greyhounds were to contribute some of their winnings to some sort of a superannuation fund, so that those of us who look after them in our retirement would benefit from the income they had earned. But I support this motion because it deliberately it talks about where dogs are not there just for pets, but they are there because they are a part of the business. They are, working dogs and greyhounds, and so that's the basis on which I would support it.
Which says racing
greyhounds. Please don't interrupt.
It says racing greyhounds, Mr Mayor, and I'm saying that it doesn't help those who are in that wonderful dog adoption program, because our fees will remain what they are, which is the standard rate for a house dog. So I support it because it assists with those that are working dogs. It assists with the racing greyhound fraternity.
Alderman Edmonds, if in your right of reply you could address that point as well, please, to clarify for. Any other speakers? In which case it is right of reply.
No worries. Start with Alderman Ewington's question. The issue, if we could pass the motion tonight and it was then brought into policy, we wouldn't have any issues, but it's the community consultation that will bump that out potentially past July 1. It may not, but the advice that I had is it probably would. And so that's why we had to write in the C2 to deal with if people have paid too much, whether the fees can just be deducted off their next year's fee or potentially rebated. Right, next one. There's the issues around cost is true, but this is an increase in fee that we're just potentially levelling out to what we always charge. So that's how I deal with that in terms of the budget. The question around dog superannuation. My main concern would they be rating it to buy homes that people might want to buy off the market. Sorry,
Kennel.
Kennel, yeah. So anyway, sorry to digress. I think my understanding, and I'll take the General Manager's advice on this, is that the definition, as we put it, is that once dogs aren't racing, they won't have that paperwork. Yeah. So it is just while they're professional athletes. Yeah. Again, I'll just, in summary, just that when we have these unintended consequences, we do have a duty to look at them. We've got the community consultation that will come in there, which is obviously what some of the holds-up are, and I just seek everyone's support.
Thank you. So the motion is as presented by Alderman Edmonds. Would you, all those in favour, raise your hand. Against? The motion is carried. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the motion standing in my name.
Do I have a seconder, please? Alderman Ewington, I think, was first there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This relates to that thorny old question of council mergers. This has been a topic for, I was about to say 10 years, the best part of 50 years, I would imagine. In recent times, in the last decade, it has been very clear that the people want to see less councils. The 29 councils are far too many. Governments, and yet time and time again, you get media polls, you get media stories, you get the letters to the editor. Anyway, there's clearly very, very strong support throughout Tasmania to reduce the number of councils. But governments of all colours have been too frightened to move forward. The continual thing of no forced amalgamations, no forced amalgamations. And then when you get a council that wants to separate and move with other councils, the council wants to do it, the people want to do it, and then the government says, no, we can't do it. So in 2017 was the culmination of a report which had a number of council merger options affecting Clarence, and as I recall, there was about a 48% of Clarence ratepayers who responded saying they wanted to move to the east. We shouldn't mistake the fact that mergers are not for mergers' sake. They should only be done if you can point out to efficiencies and a better use of ratepayer and taxpayers' money. And this is achieved if we go to the east, because there we have 4 councils. 2 of them are basically unsustainable. One of them is under severe instructions from the former Minister for Local Government about its finances. We have 4 general managers, 4 chief financial officers, 4 mayors, 30 councillors, 4 finance systems, etc., etc., etc. To the west, we have what's sustainable, or would be if they got their finances in order, councils that are large enough to be sustainable. And we already have the Greater Hobart Committee, which forms those functions of coordination across major projects, which the state ends up funding anyway. To the east, we have these small councils where admin budgets exceed their operational one, and here is where the efficiencies are to be gained. The efficiencies of centralising and removing the duplication, indeed quadruplication, of the executive and senior management functions, but at the same time decentralising the operations. This is the model that all government departments in Tasmania follow. You have a single administrative headquarters and you decentralise the operations out to where they were. That's why we have schools out at Newbena, we have a police station out at Newbena, but the administration resides in the centre. That's why the efficiencies, and that's why we should do it. This motion is a question of principle, not process. It is a submission to a board who will have the task of doing the consultations, of working out the practicalities, of moving it forward. These are people who are not conflicted. These are people who are not players in the game, as we are, but they are the people who are going to take the bigger view, take notes of these consultations. So it's, and my motion is clearly designed. I doubt whether I would get unanimous support for it, but the motion is designed to give all a voice. That's why I have moved that this debate and the points and the comments made in it are also put forward to the board so they have the alternative positions as well, even if they hopefully are not in the majority. So it's part of the discussion. It's part of moving forward. It is saying to them that we in principle agree with this. We see the benefits of it. And therefore, and we also know that other people need some options to speak. Going west achieves nothing. Going east throws a lifeline to the ratepayers of small, unviable councils whose only solution is to stick rates up to the point where they are not sustainable and therefore they are in a bind. I believe that moving to the east is to create a community of interest. I have been the upper house member for most of that area and half of Clarence, and I can assure you that my office was constantly getting inquiries from all over the electorate, and the inquiries are the same. They're the same roads, rates and rubbish that we deal with here in Clarence, but because of the administrative overheads of these small and unviable councils, they lack the lobbying power, and they lack too much of their budget is swallowed up in duplicated administrative people, processes and systems. So in the interest of efficiency and to give the people what they want, can I urge you to support this motion?
Thank you. Alderman Newington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, other than all of that, which is a pretty good summary of the situation, I mean, from my perspective, having never had an opportunity to be involved in a debate in this council in relation to amalgamations, I want to clearly state that I firmly support them. I think that's something that we should be looking at as a council. And in the specifics of the model of looking after the South East, I think really, I mean, I agree that that's probably the most appropriate way to go, although I'm not going to hang my hat on and say that's the only option I'd like to see happen. I think either way we should be looking at amalgamations that work best if in the future there becomes a recommendation back from LGAD or from the government after a further review that an amalgamation in a different format would be a better way to go, and I would leave that open as well. But I think that the synergies that we'd have with going through the South East, other than the ones that Alderman Mulder mentioned there, I think better coordination of tourism, economic and planning issues in relation to the area that we're talking about, I think would work a lot better if it was all done from a south-eastern perspective. And I think that, I mean, the obvious things like, the cost of living pressure that I think I've talked about on another issue tonight, anything that we can do to reduce the cost of living in relation to, basic government services is a good thing. So, the increased efficiencies, giving a bit more guidance to some of these smaller unsustainable councils and really opening up the debate and letting the committee know that, we're open to discuss this issue. I think that we should, certainly listen to the will of the people on this decision. And I mean, anything, I mean, I'm more than happy to vote out myself and some of the others around the table and other tables. I think that, at the end of the day, we're here to serve the people. And if that means that we've got to be, put ourselves under pressure to justify our existence as well, I think that's certainly what we're here for. So I think it's a no-brainer to look at this and get the ball rolling, get it out in the public, and really make sure that the state government actually recognise that they do have a role to play. And I think they should be a little bit more upfront and forthcoming with trying to encourage this to occur. And if anything that we can do that's going to stimulate that debate further, I think is a good thing.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Spoiler alert, I'm not going to be supporting this motion, and I would urge all of you, if nothing else, on the basis of Governance 101, to do likewise. The politest way I can describe this motion is cavalier. It is cavalier when there is no more major decision a council can make than amalgamation. And yet apparently it's not even worthy of a workshop or some background research papers. It's like agreeing to buy a house but deciding not to read the contract of sale, let alone get a building inspection done. I also suggest that it is highly presumptuous to assume all other councils are on board. It ignores the results of the merger referendum that was undertaken in Tasman in this term of council. And I would also suggest the submissions from Launceston and Devonport to subsume their neighbouring councils have not helped engender either cooperation or indeed consolidation. So, when you make a case for change, it can be hard work, but you've got to be fair dinkum about it. And you've got to bring people along with you. Because if you don't, let me tell you, Tasmanian councils are the masters of intransigence. Now, I've heard little else for 3.5 years other than consultation is crucial and Clarence has to do better on consultation. And yet the most impactful thing that a council can undertake is amalgamation. And this motion basically says, let's ignore community input. Let's, cursorily note what was said in the 2017 consultations where there was no majority support for this, let alone take account of the wide range of views around the place today. Instead, it handballs destiny of the community to Hobart bureaucrats in the local government division because, hey, you know, they're only interested in the best interests of our community. No, I think they just want simple solutions and they don't care about the moral hazard or the equity around it. Maybe that's being a little bit uncharitable. It is. But we are here to look after our community and to work through things on our basis primarily. And I'm not one to hide behind the shield of shared services. And that's always brought out when the merger discussions happen. You know, to be honest, the ultimate shared service is a merger. But you've got to be upfront about the cost and challenges of harmonising rates between councils with different rating systems and property values. And that's going to put an adverse impact on Clarence ratepayers in a merged entity. And boy, howdy, you want to look at what the cost would be to harmonise services. There's a reason why that wasn't touched at all in the studies of 2015, 16, 17. Now, the motion lists some hypothetical benefits, but without recent tangible examples. And I can tell you the most detailed and judicious local government consolidation process this century in recent times was the New South Wales Fit for the Future process. And if that was going to answer it, then surely you'd be using that to fact shame me. But you know what happened? In the 19 out of 20 merged super councils, or the merged councils if you like, it's been a train wreck with combined losses of over 1.03 billion in the first 3 years alone, and a whopping 16% decrease in productivity amongst merged councils. How do you like them efficiency apples? If a surgeon recommended surgery and 19 out of 20 times the procedure made things worse, I don't think most people would take that surgery. So in the event this motion is unsuccessful, I would foreshadow the following alternate motion inspired by the original motion, which is that the results of the 23rd May 2022 unsuccessful Future of Local Government Review Notice of Motion, along with Council's debate on the motion, be incorporated as Council submission to the Future of Local Government Review. Rather than a binary merger or no merger mindset for the Future of Local Government Review, we simply need to be focusing on better local government. That's better data, performance budgeting, outsourcing when prudent, and yes, in some cases, consolidation will make sense. But the better local government secret sauce fundamentally rests around accountability and productivity. So whilst I'm voting against this motion, if you're undecided around the table, that's absolutely fair enough. It's hard to make a call in the absence of information, and there's no shame if you choose to abstain. But I think this would be a gross abrogation of process if the motion is successful tonight. That's all.
Thank you, Alderman Walker. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor, and I totally agree with Alderman Walker there. I did say to the General Manager this morning that seeing this motion having no financials on any of those councils, no financials at all, I find it rather hard to take this motion seriously. And I've got explanatory notes. They've got some things here which I find, a bit dubious. I must say that I got a couple of things which I've read before, but the academic Brian Dollery, who's a professor in economics, it's got here, council amalgamations are not in the interests of communities. He goes on to say further, there is no net savings in amalgamation, it is expensive, and there are overwhelming evidence to support that they do not save money. It's interesting, another council, and this is similar to ours, it's called the Clarence Valley Council, are worse off after amalgamation. Are worse off. And this is interesting. The amalgamation did not lead to lower rates and annual fees, and the council failed to meet benchmarks in terms of its operating performance, debt service, asset renewal, infrastructure backlog and asset maintenance. Professor Dollery said the case study involving the Clarence Valley proved that amalgamations were not financially beneficial, and the moral of the story is amalgamations, it doesn't work, and it's important to recognise that. Now, there's so many other things on failed mergers. Council failed to yield the benefits. Contrary to typical arguments in favour of local government amalgamations, a new analysis says the changes did not lead to efficiencies. Did not lead to efficiencies. And that's what we're trying to say here. We want to be efficient. But it's proved there. Council amalgamations do not lead to efficiencies. Here, another one. Keep councils local. Experts say forced mergers, and we're not trying to force mergers, won't deliver benefits. So, on this motion, no one has said to me, what's the benefit for Clarence? Because it's Clarence people that elected me. Nobody else, not Tasman. Nowhere else, not Cyril. Mind you, Tasman had a chance to merge years ago and they said no. So, here's another one. This was an interesting one. Ku-ring-gai Council wins merger appeal. The government wanted to merge and they took the council to court and they won. And the government had to pay the legal costs. So that's interesting. 5 councils, this Queensland councils, win demerger bids. So they wanted to demerge. So as I said, when we say this, hunky-dory, we're all going to save money, we're all going to do this, it's all going to be great, there's evidence there that's not great. There's evidence there that's not great. WA Council pulls out a merger. Western Australian Council had agreed to amalgamate under the state government's reform process, but has backed out of the deal, saying it was not the will of the community. Evidence there just to say, let's amalgamate, it's going to be beneficial to everybody. There's evidence there that it's not. And looking at that motion, I want more evidence. I want more evidence before I could say I can support it.
Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm also a fan of fewer councils. I think that as a state we are largely overgoverned, but I'm not sure that this is the right model, and I don't have enough information, as a number of other colleagues have said. I would like to see the results of Tasmania as a whole, the possible mergers and where those benefits would be, and much more information on those lines. There's a lot of talk, as my colleague has raised, about mergers not being successful, but I don't have any information about whether the councils we're looking at are similar in size to, say, Tasman or Clarence. Knowing that the Brisbane City Council is the same size as the Tasmanian government, I suspect the scale on the mainland is quite different and you can't necessarily compare those things. But I don't have this information. I would suggest that Alderman Mulder, the mover of this motion, is at liberty to make this submission himself, but I don't think that we have the information or certainly the agreement to make this as the position of Clarence Council. So while I'm not necessarily against mergers, I can't support this motion as it is today.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and may I say from the outset that I was in this council when we had 46 municipal councils in Tasmania, 46. And then we had the mergers back in 1991, I think.
Correct.
And we came up with 29. And that at the time was a huge step forward, and there was a lot of objections to it. And I recall Denise Swan, a Liberal member and local government minister in the Grey government, who proposed another round of mergers, and basically at that time she lost a seat and the government didn't proceed with it at all. That was then. And it's very easy for those persons in this place, Mr Mayor, to say what happens in Western Australia, what happens in New South Wales, Victoria and so on. But look, what happened in the recent federal election? Tasmania went against the national trend. And it caught everybody by surprise. But do you know why I think that occurred? Was because the people of Tasmania have a different viewpoint on what the national feeling and viewpoint was at that time. And so it is right now for us to move forward, and that is to reduce the number of councils from 29, and I've said on Leon Compton's program over the years, I thought 13, and that could be easily changed to a number which may... I don't believe in having 3 municipal councils, super councils. I don't think that's appropriate. But having the Derwent, and even a professor at the University of Tasmania, and one of his, and I failed to bring it tonight, suggested that the Derwent be the sort of barrier with Hobart as one council, and then Clarence, Sorell, Tasman and a section of, as being proposed here, of Glamorgan Spring Bay. How can we justify 29 mayors, 29 deputy mayors? I don't think we got 29 general managers because a couple of the councils have to share it, or they did. And we have some councils where they fail to get a number to represent their constituents in that particular area. And it's been embarrassing in the past, Mr Mayor, when in fact a person who was elected deputy mayor failed to become a councillor at that particular time because he didn't get enough votes, and there was a vacancy occurred in that time because there wasn't enough persons or interested people, or people who had the time to put their names forward. So we need a change, and I believe the people out there in Tasmania buck the national trend. They don't take any notice, I don't believe, of what's happening in New Zealand or in Victoria, Western Australia, and we need a change. And what we are doing is merely what Launceston has done. They've put forward a proposal because they can see the writing on the wall that Georgetown is only a few kilometres down the road. Devonport has done the great thing, even though it's upset Latrobe, but Latrobe will have its opportunity to put forward its reasons or otherwise in relation to that. We should be progressive, and the people of Clarence, I believe, want to see the number of councils reduced, the number of elected representatives reduced, because they think at the moment, and I hear this from a number of people throughout the community, that we're over-governed to Billio and they don't see value for their expenditure on 29 councils. So I support this, and I hope it gets to and it heads to the local government review, and then we have a debate. I support the motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and it's been a very interesting discussion this evening. As you know, Mr Mayor, I have been on the record for a number of years now, in fact 14 years, saying that we have too many councils in this state. 29 is just ridiculous for a population of 541,000 people. It's ridiculous. In fact, Mr Mayor, when I retired my second term, and I had to move to the mainland for work in 2008, I was then quoted in the Mercury and an ABC saying then that we need to do something to streamline local government in this state. Population, of course, then was sub 500,000. And, of course, we look at Brisbane City Council with a population in excess of 1,250,000 individuals and a budget, as Alderman Warren pointed out, in excess of the budget of the state of Tasmania. And yet they're able to get on with business. But, Mr Mayor, having said that, is this the right approach? As we know, throughout the 29 councils, they differ in size and there's great disparity between the 29. The largest council in our state is Launceston City Council, a population of 68,000. We come in second at 57, nearly 58,000. Hobart, of course, a few thousand under us. Right down, excluding the two islands of King and Flinders, down to Central Highlands at 2,130 individuals. How do you run a business without rate base? You just can't. And that's why there are basket cases around the place. But if we do look, Mr Mayor, at the motion for us this evening, and I'm not actually, it's a bit difficult to break Glamorgan Spring Bay in half, but I'll do that. But if we combine the populations of Clarence, Tasman, Sorell and Glamorgan Spring Bay, we arrive at a population of 80,500 individuals in all those local government areas. If you then look at the legislative council seats of Pembroke, Prosser and Rumney, you have a combined population there of 77,500. So what we're suggesting here, what is being suggested in this motion tonight, is that we would have a mega council that would exceed population base of 3 or 20% of legislative council seats. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. There will be amalgamations, but no government is going to, no matter what their persuasion, going to have a mega council that exceeds in size 3 legislative council seats. It is just not going to happen. That is unfortunate, but that's the reality, political reality. Mr Mayor, I'm disappointed that this came as it did by way of notice of motion. I think this sort of very important matter should have been workshopped with colleagues. We should have an agreed council position that we can then ensure that we have all the information, not on the fly, not with a quick headline in the Mercury and a quick grab on the news. No, it is too important to get it right. I firmly support amalgamations, but more importantly, Mr Mayor, it has to be done the right way. This is not the right way. I will not be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Other speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
I'm not supporting the motion either tonight. For me, it's the cornflakes test. I think we passed this motion tonight. There's cornflakes spat over tables all over Clarence, as far as I'm concerned, because I don't think that we've gone through this debate with our community at all. I just think that we've got this position that we're going to merge with, we're going to go east and we're going to merge with 4 other councils is now our position, which is not, we saw, I think someone touched on the issues in the northwest coast where, there was a decision by the bigger council, I think Devonport, that they were going to take over, Latrobe and Kentish.
Yeah.
I'm an elected councillor who's very engaged with politics and media, and I was confused by that vote. I had to get talked down a bit by a few people, the first few people I spoke to that day, because I was confused about it. So I can only imagine how someone walking past the newsstand tomorrow would sort of interpret this vote. And honestly, that's probably enough to not have my support. I am absolutely up for the conversation around local government reform. I think I'd rather view it as local government reform than amalgamations. I think talk of amalgamations is probably not where this debate needs to be. You can redraw maps. We redraw our 5 state and federal electorates in this state all the time. People hop out of Bass into Lyons. They hop out of Clark into Lyons. They hop out of, it happens all the time. Alderman Blomley brought up the Legislative Council. That happens as well. And all of a sudden, what about in the whole West Coast moved out of Lyons into Braddon? And elected representatives have got to be nimble and they've got to represent their new community. I don't think necessarily just going, this is what we've got, let's bang them together, might produce the best outcomes. There might be neighbouring suburbs to Clarence that we can bring into our fold, absolutely. And I'm certainly not anti-local government reform. I think as long as you have things in there that provide cushions around the way people pay their rates and provide protections for workforce, I think if there's a way that it can be teased out that you can actually deliver that for people, then let's go, let's do it. And I can give you, you care about the workforce. I think a few people touched it. I couldn't care less about my position. If we get a better result for the community, then we can have that debate on whatever the map is redrawn about who represents that community. I wonder if I'm also aware that the nuance of this debate doesn't necessarily come through when you get a black and white motion. I'm just prepared to accept that, I suppose. Does anyone else remember the debate that a few of us attended when it was a representative of Elgate and a representative of the business community? I think it was at Rest Point. I remember being quite excited about going to that debate, but it sort of descended into the person who was going to be making the case for local government mergers. Lived in a abutting smaller council that abutted a bigger city, but sort of got caught in actually making the argument they liked the service level that they got in their smaller abutting council, which I found pretty enlightening. I'm not necessarily of that view myself. I think you can do it and you can do it well, but I'm not necessarily convinced that this is the way to do it. The Minister, Nick Street, today I saw announced that compulsory voting is going to come in for this election, or is likely to if it gets through the Parliament. I applaud that move. I think it also shows an appetite for reform, which is really encouraging. But it also does show you who wears the pants in this decision-making process around local government borders and amalgamations. But I think that it shows that they are willing to make some reforms. I know there's lots to be debated. I've already probably talked too much. I'm happy to be part of that debate. I'm happy to lead that debate as an elected member in the community. But this position of 3.5 councils merging is not where I'm going to bolt my opinion in this discussion at this stage. I really am not sure if a council that represents Rosny, Orford and Port Arthur is where we want to land. So I'm not supportive.
Thank you, Alderman Evans. Any other speakers?
Yes, I wish to speak, Mr Mayor.
Alderman Bomberto.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, in 2017, Council led and participated in 2 voluntary amalgamation feasibility studies, one looking at the South East region, one looking at the Greater Hobart region. I remember distinctly that yourself, Alderman Walker, myself and Alderman Pearce were heavily involved in the discussions and deliberations. We followed it very closely. And one of the aspects that we looked at and asked Council to consider was looking at some guiding principles. And those guiding principles were the interests of ratepayers came first, that amalgamations must offer measurable and demonstrable benefits to residents, that there would be efficiency gains, that there'd be fair representation, that there'd be credible and saleable rationale for any amalgamation proposition, and a quantifiable advantage with improved service levels in the long term, and a strong acknowledgement for capital value rating. So they were our guiding principles. Ultimately, KPMG undertook a detailed feasibility study, a very weighty document, and there were a number of recommendations put forward, a number of options. One of the options is similar to Alderman Moulder's motion. But let me emphasise that that was a weighty document that went into the ins and outs of everything. And I suggest that the aldermen who are on council now look at that document carefully. As Alderman Edmonds said, we felt that it was incredibly important to consult the community in relation to that particular feasibility study and the SGS one in relation to the Greater Hobart option. And we did so. And out of 5,255 valid responses in relation to the South East Council option, 48% of those respondents were supportive of that type of amalgamation and 52% were not. And so on the 18th of December 2017, which is the last formal decision of Council, I moved and Alderman Pearce seconded that Council notes the results of the community consultation. The Council further notes the KPMG study did not quantify the costs of harmonisation of services or the impacts on Clarence ratepayers of harmonisation of rating systems. But given the consultation results, Clarence's higher level of services and median price of housing, Council advises the Minister for Local Government that Council does not wish to pursue a voluntary amalgamation option with the South East councils. And then it went on to look at the Greater Hobart scenario. As far as I'm concerned, I cannot support Alderman Moulder's motion. I cannot support, I think it's a 7-line motion and a 6-line explanatory notes or reasoning as compared to the detailed work that was put into getting a feasibility study from KPMG, which was then consulted with the community. If we are going to put forward a credible representation to this review, then we need to look seriously at what that's going to entail and that it is consulted with the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy, did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, like a number of my colleagues, I very much support local government reform, and as Alderman Edmonds referred to before, when we were newly elected and we attended the LGAT conference and the topic of amalgamation came up, and the thing that stands out in my mind most of all were the people from Tasman with no on their T-shirts everywhere. Yes, I am completely supportive of local government reform. Yes, I believe that we have way too many councils and I'd love a lot more in the way of efficiency. However, I've been elected for this period of time to support those people in our community that elected me for that time without anything in that period being discussed with them about amalgamation. Community consultation is everything as far as this is concerned. We have to listen to the people. This has just been sprung upon them. Now, I can't support it in its current form. I do support local government reform, but I'm here to support those people that elected me, and amalgamation was not something that was high on their agenda. Thank you.
Right, a reply, Alderman Mulder.
Mr Mayor, I thank Alderman Roberto. I alluded to those things. The consultation's been done. The study's been done. It's been done to death since 2000, and then culminating that report for 2017. And it wasn't like 80 or 90% of the people said no to the southeastern one. It was a complex report. It didn't have two options, amalgamate east or left like this one does. It had a multitude of options and sub-options, as I recall. And as a result of all of that, 48% of Clarence residents was in favour of an eastern merger. Now, that's about... it's not a majority, but it's certainly, more than any of the other options. So, and this idea that somehow or other, that when you're talking about merging large councils, yes, there is an overlap there. But we're talking now about councils, small councils, whose budget on administrative salaries and systems exceeds their operational budget. That's where those efficiencies lie. And it's wrong for the self-interest to be guiding it. And in that debate, I still remember the council elections, that several of those councillors had gone on a platform of merging with Sorrel, and that they then promptly resigned from council when the electors' poll came back, because the electors' poll did the classic. The mayor stood up there and said this will result in job losses. He's partly right. It would result in his job loss. But the thing is that when you get when so much of your budget's going into admin, the gutters aren't being filled, the curbs aren't being filled, right? And then everyone says, yeah, but if we can switch that budget around, we can put more resources at the local level, decentralise operations, centralise the admin and the logistics. In terms of representation, 80,000 people, taking the figures as read, are represented by one legislative councillor. But there are 5 electorates. There are 80,000 odd people in each of those electorates, and each of those people is represented by 5. This $80,000 electorate, or a local government area, would be represented by 12. So in terms of representation and access to local members, it's all right. Now, we cannot go on with Glamorgan, Spring Bay and Tasman Peninsulas sticking their head in their sand and thinking that they can forever have low rates and yet have high standard services. If you want to talk about a community of interest,
thank you, Alderman Mulder.
It's the tourism.
So the motion before the chair is as presented by Alderman Mulder. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost. Alderman Walker? You're muted.
I will briefly move the foreshadowed motion that the results of the 23rd May 2022 unsuccessful Future of Local Government Review Notice of Motion, along with Council's debate on the motion, be incorporated as Council's submission to the Future of Local Government Review.
Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that, Mr Mayor.
Do you have a procedural question?
No, I was going to second it, Mr Mayor.
Okay. Sorry. I'll take Alderman von Berto as a seconder. I was too slow to pick up on your intent there.
Apologies accepted.
I look forward to any debate that you wish to add to this. Alderman Walker.
No, let's do it and be on our way.
Alderman von Berto.
Totally agree.
Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and it is with great delight that I would that I endorse submitting these submissions to the debate that we've had tonight, and I'm sure that the Local Government Review Board will take from that what it will. We are, of course, free, as Alderman von Berto, to put our own submissions forward, and I can assure you that I've done that, but it is incredibly more radical than what I was suggesting here, because I'm a great believer in radically fewer councils and much more centralised administration. However, I'm happy for the debate, as always, to be forwarded to the relevant authorities, even though on this occasion I was unable to persuade my fellow colleagues that perhaps we ought to be thinking about the ratepayers and the services being delivered in some of these small little councils who simply are sucking in the taxpayers' money, our ratepayers' money, through state government, propping up unviable and sustainable councils.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Question. This wasn't in writing, so I missed the motion. So if we could have that spelled out again, please, because quite frankly, you know, there is a procedure that we have.
And sure, it was a foreshadowed motion, and I believe it's part of Alderman Mulder's motion, was it not?
Well,
the fact that it be the proceedings be forwarded. Would you like to expand on that, Alderman Walker, please?
Well, it was inspired by Alderman Mulder's motion, so I'll say it again slowly, that the results of the 23rd May 2022 unsuccessful Future of Local Government Review Notice of Motion, along with Council's debate on the motion, be incorporated as Council's submission to the Future of Local Government Review.
So today's debate is submitted.
Yeah. That's okay. So look, I will not support that because it's basically saying, Mr Mayor, that the decision of this meeting is going to be our submission to the local government reform.
That's what it's saying.
That's what it's saying. Yeah, that's what it's saying. Now, it just is mind-boggling to think that a decision that we've made opposing mergers, which is really what it's about, because that's what the discussion was prior, is now going to be our submission to the local government review. So you just can't support that for those who have been in the debate and who voted accordingly in that last debate. So if you're going to support this, then really what's the point of actually putting your hand up and saying you're in favour of mergers? So it's just a nonsense, so I will not support it.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to this motion?
Yes. Just very quickly, Mr Mayor, just one point I want to point out. I mean, at the end of the day, well, most of us here have said we support looking at some form of merger. And I think we should be able to come away from this saying, yeah, as long as it stacks up, as long as it doesn't, affect our ratepayers, economically or financially, that it's the right thing for us to do to show a bit of leadership in this space and say that as a council, I think we've got a strong commitment to look at this moving forward and hopefully as a community, stimulate a bit of community debate about it. I agree that moving forward, it's not necessarily the ideal way of doing it, but I think we've got to show leadership and say that it's important that we do it. You know, everyone can come up with plenty of reasons why we shouldn't do it, but I think we really should walk away from here going, yeah, okay, and be serious about being prepared to commit to at least a discussion at some point in a little bit more detail, and hopefully this will stimulate a bit of discussion in the community, because it's definitely needed.
All right. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor.
It would be good if we didn't have 5 minutes each on this.
No, look, I'm not going to go 5 minutes. Look, I'm sure all these things that I've showed you tonight, I'm sure every council thought it was going to be great to amalgamate. There's evidence there that it's not great. So that's why I support Alderman Walker's motion.
Okay. Any other speakers on this?
Yeah, really quickly, if that's okay. Just that I think we should reserve the right to make submissions, as has been talked about outside of these. And just to make a general comment that nuance is dead. Well, thank you.
And you know, that's fully understood that individuals can make submissions, and submissions are welcomed by the board. Any other comments? Right, a reply, Alderman Walker.
Look, I encourage everyone to make submissions. That's the best way to go about this, because you just can't Shanghai an outcome as profound as what was put before us. Alderman Edmonds is almost on the money with his nuanced comment.
Point of order, if you hold it for a moment.
References to things like Shanghaiing and things like that are barely tolerable in the debate, let alone in the summing up of it. I really do take offence when I have presented a case that I have presented, and then we use terms like Shanghai or those sorts of things. It is not the case at all. It's
a fair point. Alderman Walker, could you please contain it to the issue at hand and not the way it's been put in this particular style that you mentioned?
Retracted. Look, I was getting onto the point of nuance that Alderman Edmonds was making. It's not that nuance is dead, but that there's no money in nuance, and there's very little votes in it either, unfortunately. And that is what I would hope would come through going through this process slowly. We did go through it extensively all last term, as we mentioned about. Here we are. We'll put this through, and maybe we can go through a bigger, deeper debate all the way through. So please make your submissions and let the contest of ideas flow. Hopefully we can all unite around the term better local government, which may mean a variety of things, including consolidation.
Thanks. So the motion is that tonight's proceedings be submitted to the board. All those in favour? Against? That motion is carried. Moving on to Alderman's question times. There are no matters on notice. Questions to answers at the last council meeting we take as read. Questions without notice. Alderman Mulder. Alderman McKendy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Goodness me, where are we? Before I ask my question, I would just like to pass on some feedback, if that's okay, because that will lead into the question to, through you, Mr Mayor, to... Oh, he's not here. It was going to be to Mr Graham, but anyway. I've had a number of people contact me about the footpath work that's underway at Lauderdale, and they were absolutely glowing with praise for the work that the council is undertaking. Now, we don't often get that kind of feedback, and I just wanted to...
If we can keep the prologue brief.
Pass that on and ask, through you, Mr Graham, the work that's being undertaken at Baluch Street at the moment with footpaths, can you give us an update on the status, please?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll have to take that one on notice and do it through a briefing report. I understand the footpath rectification crew are still operating in Lauderdale at the moment, but I'll provide an update on Baluch Street. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Cheers.
Thank you, Mayor, and Alderman Edmonds may be able to help me if I'm off the track here. And probably to Mr Graham the question will go. Look, Clarence Zebras would tell him, and Alderman Edmonds, they bought some makeshift goalposts, and they said, yes, movable goalposts, thank you. And apparently they either said either council or Tasmania, the only state or council, that they're not allowed to be used in. Is that correct?
Mr Graham?
Is that right, Alderman Edmonds?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'm uncertain in terms of how other councils operate, but our insurers have talked about the limitations in using portable goals. But we have worked with Clarence Zebras closely in terms of, because they got state government funding, on how the proposed goals can be used at Wentworth Park. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Alderman Walker, do you have any questions? You are muted. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, let's see how we go. Look, it's a maintenance question in relation to about the first 40, 50 metres of the track along Big Esplanade, starting near the pier. Requesting can rangers or officers do an inspection of that site and trim any overhanging foliage as possible. I'm getting feedback that there's a little bit of a state of disrepair there that's disorderly given the volume of people that use it.
Thank you. Have a look at that. Alderman Bromley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I have two questions this evening. The first one's following up from my question of the 11th of April meeting about the safety audit for the Lincoln Street Wombat Crossing and Lindisfarne. Has the report from the independent safety auditor or engineer been received by council? And if so, well, first it's my questions in a couple of parts.
Through Mr Mayor, we've contacted the consultant. It's due to be with us this week.
Yeah, right. Excellent. That's good news, and look forward to that being made available to elected members. Mr Mayor, in recent times, also submitted in very recent times, submitted an alderman's request about a property in Derwent Avenue. The residents have lived there for 52 years. In the last 7 months, they've been flooded on 3 separate occasions. They believe, well, they've been told by the experts they've had in there, that subterranean water coming through, and this is only in the last 7 months this has happened. There's concern that stormwater works in the neighbourhood may be causing this concern. I've asked it to be urgently addressed, and if that could be taken as a priority, please, Mr Mayor, because I'd hate to see these elderly residents, for 4 times in a row, be flooded out yet again. So that could,
Mr Graham.
I'll take that one, Mr Mayor, and follow through.
Right. Thank you.
If you could provide advice as to action, thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Alderman Edmonds.
Just one. I was hoping to get an update on where things are at with our issues with the airport.
With
the Hobart Airport.
Through you, Mayor, there's a directions hearing scheduled very shortly. It may even be this week. I'd need to check the actual date. And once that directions hearing's been concluded, we'll have a firmer idea what the hearing date will be and the process to get there.
Alderman Bomberto. You're muted. Thank you. Alderman Warren.
No, nothing.
I want to speak and I'm not muted.
I'm sorry, I thought you said that you had no questions.
No, you said I'm muted and I said no, I'm not muted.
We didn't hear you. I think we finally
I'm shouting now so that you can hear.
I think we finally have a mutual understanding.
That's good. I have 2 questions. And as a preface to my first question, I'd actually like to congratulate Council on the Clarence author series that's being undertaken at the moment. I attended the first interview with an author at the Sanford Hall on Sunday. And
please be brief with your prologue.
Thank you. And there are 2 further interviews to be conducted in different halls. The other 2 halls are the Cambridge
please
hall.
put the question.
Okay, I'm going to. The other 2 halls, Cambridge and Tranmere, have wheelchair accessible facilities and accessible bathrooms. When will Sanford Hall have wheelchair accessibility?
Mr Graham.
Through Mr Mayor, we've got no immediate plans of providing wheelchair or disability access to Sanford Hall, but we'll have a look at a review of our halls in terms of DDA compliance.
Thank you. And my second question is, by whom and how long ago was Council advised that the access and egress to Alma's Activities Centre, second floor, is unsafe?
General Manager.
Through you, Mayor. I'll need to take this one on notice, but my understanding is that it was around 2016 as part of some preliminary work that led to the design work that was undertaken by Preston Lane. But I'll take that on notice and confirm, Alderman von Berto.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the close of the open session of Council. If we could close the feed, please. And I'll be back.